Would you like to leave me your home phone number?
No.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Movie vs. Book. What's the Difference? Sponsored by Unpopular Opinion, and today, guys, we are going to be reviewing the 1986 Michael Mann movie, Manhunter. So Manhunter is a crime drama starring William Peterson, and it's famous for being the first movie to feature everyone's favorite serial killer, Dr. Hannibal Lecter. So yes, guys, Hannibal Lecter makes his film debut in this movie because this movie is an adaptation of Thomas Harris's novel Red Dragon, and Red Dragon is the first novel in the Hannibal Lecter series. Now, overall, this movie was not successful when it came out, and it was actually a box office failure. However, after the release of The Silence of the Lambs, fans retroactively went back to this movie and reassessed it, and now it enjoys a cult following, and it's much more popular. So this movie gets a lot of praise from the Hannibal Lecter fans. But just how accurate does this movie portray the book? How well did Red Dragon transition from page to film? Guys, that's what we're going to be assessing today. So we're going to be looking at what was similar, what was changed, altered, or omitted. So rack 'em up, because this is Manhunter, movie versus book. What's the difference? Now, the plot of the story is a serial killer massacres entire families during the full moon.
This guy's on a lunar cycle. I have 3 weeks and a few days until the next full moon.
And the FBI calls out of retirement their best profiler, Will Graham, to catch this lunatic before the next full moon.
If I really didn't need you to come back, I wouldn't ask. We have a better chance to get him fast.
Overall, Manhunter is not a very faithful adaptation of Red Dragon. The movie starts out very faithful to the novel because in the opening scene we have Jack Crawford going to Will Graham's house to convince him to come out of retirement to look at some of the evidence and to help out with the case. But around the halfway mark, that's when things start to deviate from the novel. So I'm going to be dividing the overall aspects of the book and the movie by certain categories, and I'm not going to review the subplot that much. But one major difference between the movie and the book is this. The book is a psychological thriller, and it dives deep into the mindset of the criminally insane. And it overall switches between a few different aspects, perspectives, and tones. On one hand, we have the law enforcement aspect where the FBI does a lot of crime fighting and criminal justice procedures to catch the killer. And on the other hand, we have the perspective of the insane. This is where we see the mindset and the mental state of the killer. But the movie is pretty much told exclusively through the perspective of Will Graham and of law enforcement. Most of the film and its perspective is that of an 80s cop movie, which kind of feels like you're watching Miami Vice, CSI, or Heat, which, and again, ironically, I'm fully aware that the people who made this movie worked on those projects, so that's what it feels like watching this movie, because there's a lot of 80s techno cop music being played. Despite some scenes featuring the killer, its overall tone focuses on the cops trying to catch the serial killer, rather than how the book did it, where it has an unsettling, eerie, foreboding, deranged nature to it. Right off the bat, that is a huge difference, and also the movie features a lot of erotic scenes with a lot of erotic music that was not featured in the book. So in both mediums, a serial killer who the tabloids have nicknamed the Tooth Fairy has already massacred 2 families during the full moon. He inflicts a lot of post-mortem injuries, and he does vile acts to the bodies of his victims. Our hero is profiler Will Graham, who used to work for the FBI and is currently in retirement. And he's a legend in the FBI because he caught 2 serial killers. One of them was Garrett Jacob Hobbs, and the other one was Dr. Hannibal Lecter.
Commissioner was saying that you're the one who got Garrett Jacob Hobbs, and then Dr. Lecter 3 years ago.
And him catching Lecter made him a legend to the FBI.
Lecter killed 9 people, didn't he?
9 that we know of. 2 didn't die.
In the movie, Graham has a wife named Molly and a son named Kevin. In the novel, Graham married a widow, and he has a stepson named Willie. So book Graham doesn't have any kids of his own, and Willie is extremely protective of his mother. And then when Willie finds out about Graham's checkered past, he feels very uncomfortable with Graham being alone with his mom. However, in both mediums in the beginning of the story, Jack Crawford, Will Graham's former mentor in the FBI, convinces Graham to come out of retirement retirement to help with the case because they have currently reached the dead end in the investigation. In both mediums, Graham joins the investigation and he uncovers some new clues that were undiscovered. Chief among them would be undiscovered fingerprints. However, he himself reaches the dead end and he decides to visit Dr. Lecter in the asylum.
I think I'll go see Lecter tomorrow.
Why?
Recover the mindset.
Overall, Lecter's role in the movie matches that of the book. He's a major minor character who doesn't physically appear that many times, but he has huge impacts on the plot.
Don't think you can persuade me with appeals to my intellectual vanity.
I don't think I'll persuade you at all. You'll either do it or you won't.
However, there are some aspects of his character that Michael Mann did change for the movie. One such thing would be they spelt his name different. It's spelt a little differently in the movie than it is in the book, but that doesn't really matter. But some of his traits for the movie are combined with another serial killer who Graham caught. So he's not a cannibal in the movie like he is in the book. Because movie Lecter, his background is that of what Garrett Jacob Hobbs' background was for the novel. So like Hobbs in the novel, Lecter would attack college girls. However, the way that Graham caught Lecter is the same in both movie and in book. Graham was investigating his murders and he interviewed Lecter since one of his victims happened to also be one of his patients. And after speaking with him, he knew that Lecter was the killer. Lecter attacked Graham, but was apprehended in the process. This experience, it traumatized Will, and it almost killed him.
I understand he cut you pretty good.
He retired from the FBI shortly thereafter. Now, the readers are told this extremely early in the novel, but it's revealed a bit later in the movie. The meeting between Will and Lecter is almost exactly the same in both movie and book because it's almost word for word. In the novel, Graham meets with Dr. Chilton, who's in charge of the asylum. Now, there was a deleted scene filmed featuring this sequence. However, it didn't make it into the final cut, but the deleted scene is actually pretty accurate to how it goes in the novel. Now, a big difference in terms of Will and Lecter's meeting is in the novel, Lecter's cell is at the end of a corridor that houses other patients. And in Manhunter, Lecter's cell is locked in a room where he's confined all by himself. Now, in the novel, there's a nylon net that hangs from the ceiling and is secured to the floor in Lecter's cell. And this is used so he can't grab and reach beyond his prison bars. But in the movie, there's no such nylon net as a double barrier. Now, with their meeting, when Graham wants to recover the mindset of the killer and get Lecter's opinion on the case, Lecter in the novel, he mentions that the mirror shards in the victim's eyes are so the killer can see his reflection in their eyes, and he also makes the suggestion that the killer is either disfigured or thinks he's disfigured, but Graham had already considered this possibility. But Lecter calls Will out on this, knowing that he already theorized this.
That's interesting.
No, it's not. You thought of it before.
I considered it.
And he tells him straight up, you're only here just to look at me to recover the mindset.
You came here to look at me. To get the old cell back again, didn't you?
I want your opinion.
Now, the detail of the mirrors being put in the victim's eyes so the killer can see himself, that's not discussed in the movie, and Lecter never mentions this during their meeting. However, in both mediums, Lecter does mention that the killer selects his victims because they have big backyards. Now, this is due to the fact that since the killer has a relationship with the moon, he would want to go outside and look at it in private. Now, that's the only insight that Lecter gives in the movie, because in the movie, Graham had already theorized this possibility about the big backyards.
Have you ever seen blood in the moonlight, Will? It appears quite black.
And in both mediums at this point, Lecter begins to antagonize Will.
Do you know how you caught me, Will?
By saying the reason that Will was able to catch him is because they are just alike. Now, in the novel, Graham walks away, but in the movie, he has a panic attack. He begins to panic when Lecter says this.
Goodbye, Dr. Lecter. You can leave messages for me at the number on the
You know
file.
how you caught me?
But since he's locked in the room with Lecter, he has to wait for the orderly to open the door to let him out. And he begins to panic because he's trapped with Lecter.
The reason you caught me, Will, is because you're just alike. You understand?
Now, in the novel, after the meeting, Graham feels numb and dizzy, but in the movie, he full-on sprints out of the asylum. And he has a panic attack, but he has to compose himself. But in both mediums, this is when reporter Freddie Lowndes takes his picture and publishes it in the National Tatler. Afterwards, Lecter is given a phone so he can call his lawyer, but he uses it to call the FBI so he can get Graham's home address. He tricks his secretary into giving Graham's address in Florida, but But Book Lecter, he doesn't open up the phone's mechanics to MacGyver his way to calling an operator. He just reaches through his cell and dials the number. Also, Book Graham lives in Marathon, not Captiva. Now let's get into our villain, Francis Dollarhide. His appearance in the movie matches that of his novel counterpart. He's in his middle age, he's tall, he's muscular, he's blonde, and you can see he has a cleft lip. Now, the movie cuts so much of his backstory, and we don't really get a trip into his psyche. In the book, Francis Dollarhide was born with a cleft lip and palate and was bullied for it his whole life. After he was born, his mother didn't want to raise him, so she put him up for adoption and he had to live in an orphanage. That is until his grandma came to adopt him, and as his grandma's mental condition began to deteriorate, she started to abuse Francis. And there was one occasion in the novel where he accidentally peed in his bed, and his grandmother threatened to cut his penis off and literally took his penis in between two scissor blades, telling him that she was gonna cut it off. He then went to live with his estranged mother and her new family. However, his step-siblings bullied him extremely bad. They were merciless to this kid. So in revenge, he kills his stepsister's cat, and that was the final straw, and he was sent back to the orphanage. When Dollarhide was 17 years old, he got into some legal trouble, but he joined the army to avoid going to prison. He was deployed to Asia, and his job in the military taught him how to develop and process film. This is when he gets corrective surgery to fix his cleft lip and palate. And at around this time, he sees William Blake's painting, The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun. And after which, he becomes totally obsessed with this painting. He then gets a tattoo of the dragon on his back. Now, needless to say, none of this is featured in Manhunter. Now, in the novel, we're introduced to him relatively early, and we actually do get some doses of what he's personally thinking and his mental state throughout the novel. His motive in the book is that of he kills these families during the full moon under his alternate personality. He believes this personality is the Red Dragon from William Blake's painting. So in his mind, each family he kills brings him closer to fully becoming the dragon. And he believes that if he kills enough families, then he's gonna permanently transform into this dragon. In the movie, like I said, Dollarhide's background is completely eliminated. The whole backstory of the Red Dragon and him transforming, it's not featured in the movie. He does not have a tattoo of the Red Dragon on his back. There is, however, deleted promotional footage of the tattoo being featured on his chest, but that's not actually in the movie. Also, when Thomas Harris was writing the novel, he described William Blake's painting that's displayed in the Brooklyn Museum, yet Manhunter features the other Red Dragon painting, because there are multiple versions of the Red Dragon painting, but the one that Manhunter features, it's different from the one that was described in the book. The one that Manhunter features is the one that's shown from a different point of view, and it's in the Washington, D.C. National Art Gallery. Also, this one's a bit smaller of a painting than the one that Thomas Harris was describing. But either way, the whole backstory of Francis Dollarhide becoming the dragon and him transforming these families, as he puts it, in order to fully become the dragon, it's not in Manhunter at all. In the movie, the killer is portrayed as a more flamboyant, cruel type of villain who merely mentions the painting.
Do you imply that I'm queer? God, no.
And he refers to himself as the dragon maybe twice in this movie, but it's not an important factor for why he's killing these people. In the novel, when he kills these families, he smashes their mirrors, then he props up the bodies of the victims and he places the shards in their eyes. This is so he can see his reflection in their eyes. In Manhunter, there's a brief mention of the killer smashing the mirror in the Leeds house and then using the pieces on Mrs. Leeds. And then there's a glimpse of a photo that showcases this, but in the movie, it's not given much detail or importance. Now, the first time the killer appears in the movie is when he kidnaps reporter Freddie Lowndes, where he abducts him in a parking garage. But we're introduced to Dollarhide much earlier in Red Dragon. Speaking of Freddie Lowndes, in both book and in movie, he's a reporter for the National Tatler who Graham despises.
Keep the
away from me.
Freddie Lounds in the movie is displayed as being persistent and annoying, but in the book, this guy is a douchebag and a low-level scumbag. So Freddie Lounds, the character, he covered the Lecter case, and he actually snuck into the hospital when Graham was in the hospital after Lecter attacked him and took pictures of him while he was sedated. Now, in the novel, Freddie Lounds pretends to be the killer in order to get the scoop on the story. However, he gets nailed by the feds. And then they use him as bait to lure the Tooth Fairy into a trap. This is omitted from the movie, but in both mediums, the FBI used Lounds by giving him false details on the case, which mischaracterizes the Tooth Fairy. Such mischaracterizations would be that he's gay or that he's had incest in his background.
He put the shorts on Charles Leeds after he was dead. I believe he did this to make sure we wouldn't think he was gay.
And this enrages Dollarhide, and instead of going after Graham like intended, he kidnaps Freddie Lounds. In both book and in movie, Dollarhide kidnaps Lounds, brings him back to his house, and secures him to a wheelchair. In the movie, Dollarhide shows Lounds pictures of his victims, and then he makes him record a retraction statement. In the novel, Dollarhide bites off his lips, but in the movie, this is a little bit more ambiguous. In both mediums, he lights Lounds on fire, and then he rolls the wheelchair into the National Tatler building. Now, in the novel, Lounds does survive long enough to talk to the authorities, but in the movie, he never regains his consciousness. Now, in the movie, there's this subplot where Dr. Alan Bloom, the forensic psychiatrist who's working for the FBI, warns Graham that he's getting in way too deep, and his mental state might relapse into a critical condition, much like how it was when he caught Lecter. So this shows that Graham's mental state, it's not fully stable, and I think a scene that really perfectly illustrates this would be he's on an airplane and he falls asleep with the evidence pictures of the crime scene out, and people are looking at it and it causes a panic on the flight. That was a pretty cool scene to illustrate that Graham's getting in way too deep on this. Also, there's a brief scene in Manhunter where Graham and Lecter have a phone conversation. This did not happen in the book. However, a lot of the dialogue is actually plucked from a letter that Hannibal sent to Graham in the novel, and some of the things Lecter says in this letter, they just use it for the conversation. Now, in both movie and in book, towards the end of the story, Dollarhide begins a relationship with a blind coworker named Reba, and they both work at a film processing plant. Now, the movie has them going out once and then they sleep together pretty much immediately, whereas in the novel, you see them developing a relationship and then they sleep together eventually. Now, in the movie, this is an emotional experience for Dollarhide, but in the novel, it has a very profound effect on him. In the novel, Dollarhide's alternate personality, the dragon, wants him to kill Reba. But being that she's the only one who showed him any kind of love, and the fact that she's blind, he feels like she doesn't judge him like everybody else does. So he refuses to kill her, and then he tries to eliminate his alter personality. So he goes to Brooklyn, and he goes to the museum to see the original Blake painting of the Great Red Dragon, and he literally eats it. He does this hoping that it'll give him complete control over the dragon. However, in both movie and in book, he sees his coworker Reba with another coworker, which sends him into a blind rage where he kills this coworker and then he kidnaps Reba. In both movie and in book, Graham is able to deduce, based off of the evidence, that the killer had to have had access to the victim's home video movies.
You've seen these films.
He then concludes that the killer had to have worked at this film processing plant where these videos were made, and that this is how he's choosing his victims. Now, this is where the movie and the book really start to deviate from each other. So in the novel, Graham goes to this film processing plant to get more information and to find out Dollarhide's personal info, but Dollarhide sees him there and he flees in a panic. Now, this is when he goes to Reba's house and he sees her with that coworker and then he kidnaps her. So the authorities head to Dollarhide's house. Now, in the movie, after he kidnaps Reba, he has her in his house and starts to play really weird music. And then you see him as he's about to kill her, but then Graham jumps through the window, and then Dollarhide picks him up and slashes him on the face and then throws him into a refrigerator. And then this is where a shootout erupts between Dollarhide and the cops. And so Graham, after he regains his consciousness, after he's been thrown into the refrigerator, he shoots Dollarhide several times until he dies. And then then as a result, he saves Reba. He closes the case because he stopped the killer. And then he goes home to his house in Florida and he's reunited with his family. And it's an upbeat 80s type ending. And though his face does have a scar, he's not disfigured, so it's a happy ending. The book, however, does not have such a happy ending. So in the novel, after Dollarhide kidnaps Reba and brings her back to his house, they have a heated discussion and he tells her that he's the serial killer that the tabloids have named the Tooth Fairy. So he reveals that he is the dragon and the dragon is the one who killed those people and the FBI is looking for him. Then he sets his house on fire and he plans to do a murder-suicide with Reba, but he can't bring himself to shoot her. So he shoots himself and then Reba, she leaves the house and she escapes. And this is about the time when the FBI shows up and she tells them that Dollarhide is dead and that he shot himself, and she put her hand on his wound and knows that Dollarhide's in the house burning and his body is destroyed by the fire. So Book Graham goes back to his house in Florida with his family, and being that earlier in the novel and in the movie Lecter got Graham's home address, he had a correspondence with the killer and told the killer his address and told him to go to Graham's house to kill his family. But in the novel, Graham, he's like, well, I'm no longer under threat because this guy's dead. So his family, they all go back to his house in Florida. But his wife and his stepson are giving him the cold shoulder because there's still hard feelings over the fact that he put them in danger and there was the possibility that Dollarhide could have gone to their property and killed them. But Graham, he went fishing on the beach and after that he started walking back to his house. But then he's ambushed by Dollarhide, who's still alive. Dollarhide pulls a gun, Graham kicks it out of his hand, but he gets easily overpowered by Dollarhide, who then stabs Graham in the face with a knife. But Graham's wife, she intervenes by hitting Francis in the face several times with a fishing pole. Then she flees after he gives chase to her. But she manages to get a hold of Will's gun, and she shoots Dollarhide to death, finishing him off once and for all. But Book Graham is in serious condition and is taken to the hospital. While in recovery, he learns that Dollarhide faked his death, and he staged that whole confrontation with Reba just to throw the FBI off his tail. He didn't actually shoot himself when he was inside the house. He shot the dead body of a gas station employee who he killed because they had a confrontation from earlier. But Reba, being that she's blind, she was tricked into thinking this gas station employee was actually Francis Dollarhide. And as a result of this, Graham is horribly disfigured and he has a really ghastly knife wound to his face. Meanwhile, Jack Crawford intercepts a letter sent from Hannibal Lecter to Will, and this letter tauntingly says to Will, I hope you recover soon and you're not too ugly.
Oh, what a cunning boy you are, Will.
However, Jack Crawford destroys this letter, and Will never reads it. And that's pretty much where the book ends. Will is horribly disfigured, and his life is ruined. Now, in the sequel novel of The Silence of the Lambs, it's revealed that Will became a serious alcoholic and his life spiraled out of control. But that's really it. Well, guys, those are the differences between Red Dragon, the book, and the adaptation of Manhunter. What did you think? Were you shocked? Does this make you want to watch Michael Mann's Manhunter? Does this make you want to read Thomas Harris's Red Dragon? And if you've done either or both, what did you like better, the book or the movie? Comment that below to let me know. Also, guys, hit that like button, hit that subscribe, follow me on Instagram because I very much appreciate when you do that, and it goes a long way to really help me out. Not kidding, just one like can go a long way and make a huge difference. And plus, the good news is it's totally free and it costs you nothing to do so. So please, right now, hit that like, hit that subscribe, and follow me on Instagram. Again, that will be linked in the description below. Well, guys, that's all I have for you, and I'll see you on the next, well, sort of, unpopular opinion.